Kazakhstani customs have tightened inspections of cargo arriving from China bound for Russia and Belarus, seeking to detect goods subject to Western sanctions. For Russian and Belarusian logistics companies, this has resulted in a collapse, increased tariffs and forced revision of supply routes. According to the Russian portal lenta.ru, kilometers-long queues of over 2,500 trucks traveling from China have formed at the Kazakhstan-Russia border. Shipments of electronics, drones, clothing, and Western brands have been particularly targeted. Representatives of logistics companies report that the situation has worsened since the beginning of October, with borders turning into massive traffic jams. Mass inspections have forced carriers to raise rates and change logistics. Now, questionable cargo is shipped via the Far East and Mongolia, although these routes are longer and more expensive. However, queues are possible there, forcing carriers to seek any alternative. Logistics companies are confident that this is not a temporary glitch, but a new reality, and predict a further tightening of the screws by Kazakhstan, which is beginning to more strictly enforce Western countries' restrictions against Russia. The tightening of inspections coincided with a series of talks between Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and US President Donald Trump. On September the 7th, Tokayev stated that he was ready to constructively discuss trade issues and hoped for the abolition of the 25% US tariff on Kazakh goods. Earlier, Kazakhstan's Deputy Prime Minister Serik Zhumangarin emphasized that the country would not assist in circumventing anti-Russian sanctions, as this could have a painful impact on its own economy. Experts estimate that if the situation persists, the cost and delivery time of Chinese goods to Russia could increase significantly. Carriers predict that some flows will shift to sea and rail routes, placing additional strain on Far Eastern ports. Media previously reported that in September, information emerged about Europe's readiness to consider imposing sanctions against Kazakhstan for re-exporting prohibited products to Russia. The European Union is considering imposing sanctions against Kazakhstan for the first time for re-exporting banned products to Russia. According to Bloomberg, the new package of restrictions could include companies from Kazakhstan, China, and other countries that help circumvent Western bans and supply the Russian military-industrial complex. Kazakhstan, which has built a business on reselling goods in defiance of sanctions, risks being targeted. If the EU takes action, it will ban the supply of machinery and equipment to the country, which is then shipped en masse to Russia for weapons production. This would be a real blow to Kazakhstan's economy. An attempt to profit from Moscow's weakness is proving catastrophic. Experts note that President Tokayev values his international reputation highly. The impact of sanctions, if they occur, will be painful for him personally. The introduction of secondary sanctions is being discussed with Washington. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has explicitly stated that pressure on Russia needs to be increased, but this requires European support. According to Bloomberg, the sanctions list could also include banks and oil companies, restrict the export of chemicals and dual-use goods, and punish Chinese companies assisting Moscow. The package could complement measures against Russia's shadow fleet vessels and ban reinsurance for tankers transporting Russian oil. Unexpectedly, frank remarks about the war against Ukraine were aired on Russian state radio station Komsomolskaya Pravda. Invited guest, political scientist Boris Medvedev publicly accused dictator Vladimir Putin of ruining the chance to successfully conclude the so-called SVO with his inappropriate ultimatums. According to the propagandist, the Kremlin made a strategic mistake by rejecting President Trump's very generous proposals for resolving the war. He openly admitted that Putin himself had raised the stakes and issued ultimatums that proved unacceptable, thereby derailing the peace process. Trump really wanted peace. You know my position. I thought it was a more advantageous situation for us. And that advantageous situation is over, frankly. I don't know, maybe the Russian president has his own motives and reasons, but I think the future situation will be worse. If we already have a desire, for internal reasons, economic or strategic, to freeze the conflict or something similar, I think the most favorable moment to do so has passed. Things will get worse. The demands will be greater. The chance to finish what began in 2022 on more favorable terms for us has been lost. Medvedev stated. He stated that Putin had put forward unreasonably high demands, overestimating his own strength. By and large, the only realistic solution was some kind of freeze with some kind of territorial exchange, using the Trump factor to pressure Ukraine. But for that to happen, Russian conditions had to be such that Trump could exert pressure. Clearly, if we demand territories we don't control, and these are large chunks of territory, Trump won't agree to it. And he hasn't. And Ukraine, through Zelenski, is already bluntly stating that it's not even ready to give up Donbass. We can already see that Ukraine has become very comfortable in these new conditions and won't compromise. Trump won't demand compromises from it anymore, the propagandist declared. Medvedev is confident that Russia will no longer be able to emerge from this war painlessly. Ukraine will survive as a state, and the West will become even more united and armed. Medvedev also drew attention to the economic consequences. He stated that the continued economic weakness and the declining purchasing power of the ruble will worsen the country's situation, despite official statements from regulators. The purchasing power of the ruble is clearly declining, no matter what the head of the central bank says. Statements of this kind from a critic outside the Kremlin's information space are unusual in their frankness. The public admission that it was Moscow's demands that buried the possibility of a deal sounds like a rare internal remark about the leadership's strategic mistakes.